Hi, I'm Joe Natale, and I'm very pleased to be joining the energy and the excitement of Shopify as a brand new board member. I've spent the last 30 years plus in the telecom, technology, and media industries. I started my career as a software engineer and worked my way through various roles in systems integration to be the CEO of TELUS, the CEO of Rogers, and now I'm a chapter in my life where I'm really working with organizations that I love spending time with and people I enjoy spending time with. And that's the Shopify board. I'm also on the board of Sun Life. I'm on the board of the Creative Destruction Lab. And I'm working with a number of companies that are scaling, both as an investor and an advisor, and I'm loving it. So happy to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm super excited here to be here with Joe Natale, who's just joining us on the board of directors of Shopify, and I'm here to just let's sit down and have an interesting conversation. This is what we do.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me, Toby. I'm very excited about joining Shopify. And the team and the excitement and the energy that I see here.
Yeah, and we are super excited to have you. Let's jump right in there. You just joined us for our first board meeting and doing Summit Week, which was 2 weeks ago from when we are filming this. This is always a special time in Shopify because we all get together and break bread and sing, dance, and also just hack on stuff, and just this company's deeply creative, celebrating craftsmanship, and it's one of those really interesting vignettes, and frankly my favorite week of the year. From your perspective, this probably seemed completely crazy.
You know what? Not crazy. Far from crazy. I would say it seemed completely right in terms of everything I've heard and read about the culture of Shopify. And I think culture lives most in those events. It's like the nerve center of culture shows up somewhere in an organization. And it was great to see a real deep glimpse into it. The energy, the excitement, the hack days, Harley driving around in a golf cart with a megaphone.
Yeah, that's right. By the way, this is how Harley sees himself at all times. So he gets to live out his,
his alter ego.
Yeah, exactly.
So I applaud you for that, because a lot of organizations that would be something that would be anathema to what's done in business. But I think if you're trying to build a culture at scale, which is much harder than building an organic culture with a small team. You need things like that to fuel that culture, to remind people who we are, what we stand for, why we're here, and I think it's perfect from that perspective.
Yeah, it's. We can also company culture is a topic I really want to sort of back in, but I would also love to I would just love to hear your story maybe
sure.
let's just jump into your story.
A story. Mine is a story that it's typical for a lot of families that have come out of being new Canadians. My parents were part of a wave of people that came to the U.S. and Canada in the late 50s and early 1960s. Most of my family went to New York. My mother and father decided to come here. They couldn't get into the U.S. and they were living in Switzerland. And I said, let's go to Canada. My father was a machinist, and they were looking for people with those skills, and so they got early and easy access. And so the story really starts there. They came through Pier 21. They made their way by train to this strange new place, having no English language skills, having no money, zero money. They borrowed money to make this voyage. They made their way. My uncles and aunts came. They were really a family of, still are, of entrepreneurs, a family of grinders and builders. Like, my dad didn't last long as a machinist in Canada. He felt that there really wasn't as much respect for the trade here as he saw in Switzerland, as you saw in Europe. So he said, I don't want to do that anymore. And
still working on this challenge, my friend. It's been a moment there, and this is still an ongoing process.
Ongoing, the societal acceptance of these roles.
We're making progress. The craftsmanship is not a dirty word anymore.
And so, like I would say that I was a curious kid about the world outside of my, Italian Canadian enclave. I was fascinated by technology and how things worked. Probably got as much education, through school in Waterloo as I did at the kitchen table, because a kitchen table for me is a memory of my father and my uncles, concocting the next business idea, and whether it was importing goods from Europe or distributing household products, or they would have loved Shopify because they were doing it all through brute force and old methods. And then we had a series of different restaurants growing up, and then my father got into real estate and construction. Like it was a natural arc of things. And to this day, he's still in that business. He's still like in the construction property management business, even though he's in his 80s. Like he's never stopping. So I grew up in that crucible, and I decided to go to engineering school. I went to Waterloo Engineering School. I was, enthralled by the idea of understanding the basis of how things worked. I was enthralled by technology. I took a computer programming course in high school, one of the very first ones, like on this old punch card machine, right? And then I bought one of the very first Apple products for home.
Do you remember the machines? Like was it like IBMs or PDPs or something? Do you
No,
remember
it was before that. It was like a Univac or something like that.
Oh, wow.
It was like a truly
Waterloo would
bespoke piece of iron, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun.
It was fun, and so then I went to university. Also, I went to Waterloo for co-op. It had been sort of, my father had to declare bankruptcy in that period because of this business venture he was in. So I was on my own for paying for school. So I had some money, and then the co-op program seemed to kind of make it work in my mind as well. So off I went. I really loved it. I loved the experience of it. I loved the hands-on nature of it. Like Waterloo was very much a working school. It was very much I remember spending months in a lab building a 4-bit operating system in assembler, right? Grinding out every piece of code, like just to do very basic functionality. I'm thinking, isn't this cool? And I remember developing competency in different languages along the way, software, whether it was Fortran or Pascal, early versions of C, we were just doing stuff. It was kind of fun, and then the work terms complemented that. I worked at IBM for a few work terms. It was the era of the mid-range computer, and just developing software and helping them in the selling and marketing of that software. I did a term in robotics and automation at General Motors. So I kind of came out with this sort of view of all this cool stuff that was happening out there. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I thought, well, if you don't know what you want to do, maybe I'll go be a consultant. So I went to Accenture, what is now Accenture, and really became part of a team of people that was developing software, implementing ERP solutions. I was in the very first SAP implementation in North America.
Oh,
if you want to date me. And so I kind of worked through that era, and at one point I was sitting with two of my colleagues, and we said, you know what, we could do this on our own. We don't have to be part of the big firm. So we quit. We started our own little boutique firm. We did a lot of work in manufacturing and supply chain systems for medium-sized companies that were, they were either consumer packaged goods or industrial products companies. And three of us, we built that business to around like 90 or 100 people. We had lots of work happening all over North America. I was a young guy, not married or just about to get married. No fixed address. I was just kind of living in different places where the work was, and it was a lot of fun. It was a great time. One day, the head of consulting from KPMG came into our offices, and I never met him, unannounced. We just beat them on two major assignments.
Just show up.
Yeah, I just showed up. And he says, I want to see you guys. And he said, like, you know, who the fuck are you guys and where'd you come from? Right? And so that started a conversation that lasted like a year and a half, 2 years, where they bought our firm. We became the leadership structure of KPMG Consulting in Canada. And I was meant to stay for a 2-year earn-out. I thought, you know, I don't want to be part of a big company. I'm going to go do my thing again. I get some money in my pocket, go do the startup, whatever that might be. But all of a sudden, you know, they had big grand plans. They wanted to form a big global consulting group. They were going to rip the consulting practices out of the member countries and create a global entity to go head to head with the other big global players, largely Accenture and EDS and these sort of people that were, you know, at the time. And we were going to go public on the NASDAQ and blah, 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 blah. It was like a big story. I was a young guy, you know, and I was going to get a big global role. And I thought, okay, I'll go for the next chapter of this adventure. So I stayed for about 6 or 7 years, and I found myself in this big global role. Like I was running a part of the consumer and industrial markets business. I had teams in Asia and Europe, all over the U.S. Did a lot of work in the automotive industry, did a lot of work in transportation, a lot of work in consumer goods. It was fun. It was fun. You know, but I had a young family and 3 very young daughters. You know, 2 were born, 1 was coming. I was really loving the work, but I was never in Canada. I was never home. And
like what other run-ins with the telco industry, mobile industry did you have at that time?
At that point?
Yeah.
Not much.
Okay.
Not
so
much.
That
a little bit sort of work on you know, workforce management in the telecoms industry, which is a sort of a complete analog to what we were doing in manufacturing. Yeah. But it was truly just, you know, an adjacent analog, not something that, you know, I spent my, you know, engineering degree in software and networks, so it was sort of it was there in the back of my background partition, but not in terms of this business life I created at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So you come back to Canada.
Come back to Canada.
Excellent. Like you joined TELUS.
Yeah.
Like give us sort of the telecom arc here.
Yeah. So I come back to Canada. I joined TELUS. We're a Western-based, recently separated from the government telecom company with grand aspirations. So we've got to build national network, because that was the model. That is the model today, is infrastructure-based, investment-based. We've got to develop teams outside of the West. We start buying up little businesses and stitching together the beginnings of the team while we go and do organic growing and acqui-hires, and like it was sort of a build in the pure sense. We bought ClearNet. We bought another, which is a small mobility player in central Canada. We bought a whole bunch of businesses doing different parts of the telecom pie, from you know, infrastructure for banks and governments, network building companies, you know, meeting room automation companies, cybersecurity companies. Like it was like a let's go build a foundation, because we can't do this organically. We need a starting point, which created its own challenges in stitching together all these various cultures. And then meanwhile, we had this arc of wireless going from 3G to 4G, actually from 2G to 3G to 4G, you know, as mobile data became the thing, as the iPhone launched. And therefore, you know, the acceleration of investment and the adoption curve started to happen in a big way. And that created a big fight for distribution, because, you know, clearly we break in the back of adoption of mobility as an example, but whoever had the best distribution would win. So whether it's opening stores or early commerce, online commerce distribution, et cetera, was the game, and we were fighting that very heavily. So I managed to through that period, I pretty much had every senior role. I ran the B2B business in building major networks for the Department of Defense, for governments, for large enterprise companies. I had the consumer role, where we were really upgrading to 4G and trying to figure out this distribution equation and the right construct around it, and how to go to market. I ran the operations piece, and then at one point I became chief commercial officer, and then I became CEO. So it was like a classic arc of, if you can do all the jobs well, then at some point you might be the person who runs the place. But it wasn't so much like a Herculean set of tests. Like it was more like, the best use of the best athletes was in this place. Can you guys go there and go do that?
Sounds way too hard to me. I just ended up being the first person to show up and cleverly hired everyone under me. That worked for me. You have to actually be really, really good at to do this thing.
I had to jump into incredibly uncomfortable situations with people I didn't always enjoy spending time with.
Okay, so
I do that.
TELUS,
and then I leave TELUS. Yeah. I leave TELUS and I hit the beach.
You hit the beach. Did you do the mojitos on the beach thing? How long did you last?
I did mojitos on the beach. I was miserable.
I know. It's like, that's a universal story. I've actually never ended up talking with someone who actually managed to pull this off more than 2 weeks.
So you do all those things you've been putting off, like, organize your music, take a few more hobbies, read some things, and then you go, now I'm bored out of my mind. Let me out of this cage. I think this is all like fantasy land, that somehow the beach is a wonderful place. I think it's aspirational, not real. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go back in the game, and what do I want to do? I said, once again, I was sort of that crossroads. I can do anything, and I was fortunate enough to have some financial security. So it really was like an embarrassment of choices. And I thought, what do I do? And I started, doing some tech investing. I started to do some more kind of growth-oriented investing with private equity, and it was helping with some of the businesses. It was fun. But I felt like a tourist in all these places. I felt like, yes, I was helpful and impactful, but I wasn't ready for that yet. It felt like a later stage option, not that stage. So I said, I'm going to put myself into the job market and see what's out there. And I had two real opportunities. One was to go be the CEO of Verizon Wireless, and the other was to go be the CEO of Rogers. And I kind of debated which one, and back and forth. And Ted Rogers was my hero, in the telecom industry. And I had the opportunity to spend some time with him over dinner over many years. And listen to his view of the future, and I thought, wow, what an honor to be the person that picks up on that journey and takes it to the next place, takes it to the next generational place overall. I took that job. I jumped in. We had a lot to do. We had a lot to do on the customer service side. We had a lot of constructs that needed to be changed dramatically, like there was a time when, sounds like a small thing, but it's a big thing. Pricing structure. Pricing structure in telecom was, I think, anti-customer.
I think people might still have opinions on this.
Yeah, I think so. That opinion is sort of, some of it never goes away, because there's still things that aren't perfect, and some of it is sort of, you do so much, you create so much friction that people don't forget it, right? But the biggest part, one of the biggest problems was in wireless, this notion of paying for overage. And overage fees were punitive, and it created bill shock, and then it created negotiations with the customer around how to pay for that overage, not to pay, and you realize that you're writing most of it off. All you're doing is you're just damaging customer relationship. It's driving retention, satisfaction problems. So, we decided, for example, to create unlimited. Unlimited really meant that there's no additional price when you hit whatever size, bucket size, and we just have sort of fair usage policy. And so that was a big change, because, a big part of revenue was in that category, disruption in that category. And we had a massive network build going on. We were trying to re-architect customer service. So it was a heavy lifting blue collar job. Like, there was lots to do.
It's a huge institution.
Huge institution.
I mean, we're talking. This is. I get that we are talking about a lot of Canadian topics. There's like, we could sort of make equivalencies here between like these companies, American companies that people might recognize, but like it's the scale is massive, and in fact the challenges are kind of potentially more significant to wire up a country like Canada just because of how scarcely populated it is and how large it is and so on. So it's Rogers was how many people?
Rogers was say 28,000 people. And was the largest wireless provider, still is the largest wireless provider in Canada, largest internet provider, home internet provider in Canada, largest sports broadcasting franchise. So sort of both the entertainment side and entertainment media side and the internet connectivity side were a big part of the business, and we touched the lives of most Canadians in some way, shape, or form. So the sense of responsibility around that is huge. It never kind of leaves you in terms of what, and really came to life during the pandemic, I would say, Toby. Like, during the pandemic, you really realized just how mission critical this stuff is. Right? And all of a sudden, demand was up 40, 50, 70%. And the network was sort of, at capacity, beyond capacity. And we were on the phone with Netflix negotiating bit rate. We were trying to figure out what was the consumption factor on video conferencing. Like, it was a engineering equation about how do we manage this massive spike in demand overnight and not let people down.
Yeah, right? It's crazy to think of that time, but like it's like just the entire world, like the internet connectivity was the only connectivity to societies. Also, society went digital. There's been so many companies that just like didn't have, haven't digitized yet. This all just like changed overnight. Like, suddenly you had like mining companies doing video calls, which is like, like we'd see this absolutely normal now, but like this sort of rapid digitalization happened in, like it was going on, it was happening over years. I always thought it ought to go faster, and then suddenly it was completed.
In a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
It was like a 10-year progression happened in a year.
Yeah. And of course, everyone has models about future needs and tries to build their networks ahead. Shopify is the same thing. We have these Black Friday events which catapult us forward, but like outside of that, we have a fairly predictable and then well-predicted needs of capacity and so on. And we have those machines and maybe commitments to get the ones we will need in the future. But like suddenly everyone had to go forward and like had to call their hosting providers, or like we had to bid on lots of virtual servers to just even get capacity for dealing with our traffic. And so it's at all levels of the stack. This was a very complex time.
Well, and the notion of reliability became even more critically important. Because of this reliance now, and that reliance that's persisted. We used to have these grand debates around, what is acceptable reliability? 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines is a grand debate, right? And the engineers would come with these mathematical equations, and I would say, okay, well, 3 nines. 3 nines means like 8 hours and 45 minutes of downtime a year. 4 nines. Well, 4 nines means 52 minutes of downtime a year. Okay, 5 nines means like a few minutes of downtime a year. I said, what if those few minutes are during Black Friday? What if those few minutes are during like a robotic surgery session that's happening remotely? Right? So we can no longer look at these things as sort of mathematical averages. We have to kind of understand what are the mission critical activities going on in society that are being relied upon by individuals and businesses and families and as a whole, and how do we play a role in that? Because reliability is what we're selling more than anything else,
Very good. Yeah, fascinating industry. Absolutely, storied and going through so many phases. The telecom was or even is like it's specialized, but it's I mean, for a long time, it was the tech industry of planet Earth, right? Like this is what what we did is like we built our telecom networks, and it's by far the largest projects that were going on, the networking the planet.
They are, and leaving no person behind has sort of been the mantra in working those economics. We tried many times. We had this big debate: are we a carriage company or a content company? Can we be both? And I think when it came to entertainment, we figured some of that out. But we had many sort of attempts to be a software company, and we never really, as an industry, got it right, because software, by its very nature, has to be a global and solving a global problem. Yes, you can create niche we created niche applications in all kinds of areas, in fleet management and CRM, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they never got the scale because it wasn't in our DNA, part of it. And then part of it is, you had to really have these global mandate or aspirations. And I used to call it the tyranny of the urgent would take over with respect to the telecom responsibility, and it's the DNA just didn't work. I mean, you and I have talked about Shopify and supply chain as an example.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It works the other way too. We did not do a great job sort of becoming a company. Just moving atoms around was like, as a software company, just seems. What do you mean I can't just have infinite zero cost copies of everything I'm making here? Like, this is like these atoms are actually rivalrous. This sucks. Like, why do people do this? It's I mean, again, back to telecom, like, and software, sort of at the intersection of those things. Really, really fascinating stories happened, right? Like, you can see BlackBerry inventing the smartphone from the vantage point of a hardware company, and then arguably Apple perfecting it first because they were a software company that made hardware like second. Actually, Apple might be too much of an aberration, but like you see this play out with cars, right? Like the Mercedes and companies like this have a very hard time writing software for their cars, but like cars are turning basically on computers on wheels, and a sort of like Teslas are basically iPhones on wheels, to make a bad analogy. So it's interesting. It's like, I don't know, like I'm always amazed by how path dependent things are, and how much the first step of something or the point of origin ends up mattering for a final product.
It does matter, and it does matter a lot, because coming out of that groove is difficult. It's difficult, and if there is a grand important future in that DNA or in that path, it's wonderful. Like Shopify, I think, has so much opportunity ahead. We're impacting people's lives, we're impacting GDPs of countries. This is sort of in the mainstream of what matters to individuals and merchants and businesses and brands. It's incredible. But you watch that arc for some industries, when they get to the place in the arc where they need to change the path dramatically, they're kind of stuck. Right? Most organizations have a very difficult time disrupting themselves because of short-termism, because of greed, because of whatever it might be, horizon conflict. You can't wait till Rome is sacked to reinvent Rome. Like, it's sort of this notion they have to wait for this dark day, and then they can have this burning platform and we can change everything. But the hardest thing is to disrupt an organization that's doing well.
Yeah,
right.
It's not a lot of. I mean, there's examples of companies that have done this, but like it's really rare. It's really, really rare. In the small scale, it happens. Like early pivots is sort of like a term that's thrown around startup communities. But it's easy to pivot if the thing you're doing is not working. To your point, right? Like, so, or easier. Yeah. So now you're focused. You've run Rogers for a while. You're like, you just joined the Shopify board. What's your what makes a great board? Asking for a friend.
Yeah. What makes asking for a friend? You and I had part of this conversation just a few months ago. So I've decided that at this point in my career, I want to assemble a portfolio of things that I love doing with people I enjoy doing them with. It's not more complicated than that. And
it's the best strategy that exists.
Exactly, exactly. And part of that is board work, and part of that is investing in some other things. But I would say on the board, what makes a great board? A great board spends the bulk majority of their time on the mission of the organization and supporting the management team on the mission, on the most important decisions, either reaffirming decisions or debating important topics, and really in a supportive, constructive, thoughtful way, because they bring experience and context that is helpful to that management team. Like, to me, that's full stop the number one role of a good board. A good board is also, a board has a culture, and a culture of fun and excitement is really important on a board. I've said this before.
It's a journey too. It's an adventure too.
It's an adventure too.
It's one of the teams of a company, isn't it?
Exactly.
Exactly. So it's no different in this way. It's different responsibilities for sure, but every team has different responsibilities.
Right. And if you wake up the day of a board meeting and say, "I can't wait to get there," then we're doing a good job in terms of the culture and the adventure of the board. If you wake up and say, "I can't believe I have to read 3,000 pages," and then go there and 99% of the meeting will be, all in favor, then it's like, it becomes so transactional, so perfunctory, and so boring, right? And I don't think the management team and the CEO gets much out of it when it's that way. So that's the inherent trade or social contract, is to say, management says, "You're going to help me with some of the most important things we're working on based on your experience," and the board member says, "Great, you're going to help me create an adventure at this part in this chapter of my journey," and the rest is sort of like just stuff that has to happen because there are legal constructs around being on a board. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like a board of a public company is under the obligations, like a fiduciary duty, and like representing shareholders and all these things, and those are really, really important. Governance, audit, finance, these kind of things. But like doing all these well are things that like are load bearing for a company. So like they have to. All of those are opportunities to not just like put a check mark next to it, but actually like take real seriously and figure out how to, just like build better companies. Like I'm just like, this is the thing I keep getting back to. Like obviously I love building the product and help build the careers of the people I get to work with by sometimes challenging them, sometimes giving them the magical combination of words that unlock something for them. These kind of things. But I also just like love adding to. Having an opportunity to add to the brainstorm of how to build better companies, because this is itself a craft in a way. And so
it is a craft. It is a craft, and the crafting of companies doesn't have enough intentional focus on it. It's almost accidental sometimes in a lot of companies. But what I see from you, Toby, and from the team is there's a lot of intentional focus on what is the craft of building a business. And it starts with having a first principles mindset around it. One of the things that really attracted me to Shopify is this sort of this ethos around first principles. I've always believed it in my heart. It's been a big part of my leadership style. It's like, I don't care why we've always done it that way. It doesn't matter. What is the right way to do something for today? Somebody once said, I think it was Drucker, one of these management gurus, said that when a crisis hits a business, the crisis isn't really the danger. The danger is applying yesterday's thinking to the crisis, right? And if you have a first principle ethos and mindset, I think you can navigate almost anything with the right people around, with the right background and experience, right? In a collaborative culture that is not afraid to share thoughts and ideas, have a good debate, have a good fight, but know that we all have the same goals and mindset in place. Right?
And I really appreciate this in a in the board conversations, just like because like I mean I love learning things, and like you know, one of my favorite things I think our product does is in some special cases, you know, people adopt it because they have a utilitarian need, like they just need that online store, and that's fine. In some cases, then later, it inspires them to actually build a better or larger business, maybe more ambitious business than they otherwise might have set out, just because they wrap their head around how the software works and understand its capabilities. And you know, we've been working over the last couple of years to make it significantly more tractable for people to sell international, like expand the business, and keep the business legible at the same time, which is a extremely underappreciated aspect of it. So the intention, like we didn't have to do this because some competitor was much better at having software that you can use to go international. We did it because when we make our customers' businesses simpler, more legible, that means they can use whatever ambition or courage they have, which is always a limited resource, to invest with more conviction into also selling in other countries, and then they become bigger, and they've learned something from the software. You know, in a way, this is us building the software, influencing the users, and paying it forward a little bit, because these are all based on things that we have figured out for ourselves. We you know, Shopify is a very international business, and we can use some of it understanding and knowledge in our products to our customers. And like, so this sort of chain of paying it forward is important, because you know, our editions, like the developer conference, is a lot about here's what we know about how you can build your business to do better. And so the board of directors at best, like you know, can play this role to the company, because like I mean, you've seen in like a very, very different slice of a world of company building, of a world of you know, just like business. And you know, you had, like, I basically never had another job, so like you had lots of jobs.
Yeah.
Like, you know, this sounds very useful to have that in your background. So
lots of jobs and lots of great things that happen, and lots of scar tissue.
Yeah, right.
Which is all useful.
Yeah. So how by the way, how do you avoid scar tissue? This is the thing that's like, it's so often, like I have always this picture of my mind as a young kid, sort of in wonder, watching my late grandmother leave the house, because it was this production of you know, she would have her keys like in her pocket, but then she would always check the pocket before leaving, and then she like checked her purse, and actually she went through like 10 different places where the keys could be, and it's always the same, because I think she at some point forgot her key to be in one place, and like she's accumulated all these kind of moves, and so it becomes like this incredible choreography of movements that happen every single time she leaves the house. And I always wondered like how I can avoid having all this scar tissue from all these individual moments of having at some point forgotten the key in a different pocket. And you just like, I look at a lot of companies now and figure like they just look like my grandmother trying to leave a house. Like it's there's so much ceremony, it's so much process around trying to avoid the problems that occurred once ever.
Right.
And so I'm like, it's something I think about a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, you know, inoculating yourself from the scar tissue is very hard. I think accepting the fact that there is scar tissue, and you know, helping the body adapt. Like, you know, there's this whole theory of plasticity in the body. You know, you lose capability, something gets scarred, gets hurt. You know, through the power of the mind, really, the power of the mind, the nervous system, bodies adapt. But
like in this case, often adaptation is because like after something goes wrong, the arguments inside of a company to create the one true new policy that like will make it so that this can never go wrong again. Sounds like such a good idea, right? Like, and it's very, very hard to argue against. But like, again, you're just loading up different policies one on top of the other because of the problems of the past, and eventually the whole thing becomes incredibly unwieldy.
It does become unwieldy. I mean, the best, this is like the notion of someone once said, in the world of cybersecurity, the most important firewall is the human firewall, being cognizant. And I think a culture that is cognizant of that fact will do the right things. Part of the problem is that in organizations, it's what happens when there is a problem or mistake. One of my leadership mindsets was always celebrate failure, learn from it, move on. As opposed to let's hide failure, let's go search for the guilty and eviscerate them, and then you create this culture that creates scar tissue. Because there's comfort in saying, you know what, I found this problem and we fixed it once and for all, and there's like a Six Sigma that it's ever going to happen again, but it doesn't matter. The culture dictates that sort of wrapping ourselves in scar tissue. So I think it does come back to culture, Toby.
Yeah. I want to talk about like products. Like you've built, shipped, and built infrastructure for supporting products your career. How do you build products that like your customers can rely on, that add to the trust relation that customers have with a company?
Mm-hmm. I think first of all, there's a mindset around products that are they enabling to the customer, enabling in a true sense. Let them be something, aspire to something, advance something far beyond the product itself. I even in the telecom world, I would say we're not selling a wireless service. We're selling that video conference with your grandmother or your daughter on a Saturday morning to catch up and see what's happening in their lives. We're not selling a streaming service. You're selling Friday night at the movies with your family after a long week, having fun, or gaming, whatever you might be doing with your family on that Friday night. So it starts with that sort of mindset that you're enabling an aspirational life, a better life, much like Shopify is enabling the aspirations of merchants. And to do that, you have to really focus on what are the friction points. In life, there's sort of the coefficient of static friction keeps us all back on whatever that might be. A small thing in life, a big thing in life. And if you focus on the friction factors, good things happen. And you focus on the friction by making things easy to do, but also by giving people hope and confidence where they would not otherwise have it. Whether it's helping a merchant with a marketing strategy or with, shop capital, like these are enabling mechanisms that help people aspire to a greater sense of self. And that is an incredible customer relationship, because then it's not just based on satisfaction, it's based on trust. It's sort of the notion, I've got you. I've got your back, I've got you, I'm here for you, is a very different narrative than here's a product, hope you like it. Mm-hmm. Yes, it has great feeds and speeds and features, better than the other guys. But, if it's just the product and not the outcome, then I think we're missing the boat completely. The outcome, it may be not just about the product itself, but other factors that help contribute to the person's success with that product.
Exactly. Yeah, like I think people come for the utility value, but then stay for how it gives them skills, power, however, what satisfaction, delight. It's but that's actually a rare narrative in industry, right? Like it's like there's just a lot of it's written about the highly quantifiable things. It's like, you know, computers being sold on the amount of memory they have rather than what you can accomplish with them, right? It's sort of a very, very common thing, and you see it everywhere outside of the technology industry as well. So, and then the most unquantifiable of all the unquantifiables ends up being like this sort of trust relationship, right? Like which really comes from like doing reps together. Like people try something and it works at least as well as they were hoping.
Right. And being, as the product developer, product engineer, being perpetually dissatisfied with what the product is and how it's being utilized and how it's fulfilling that promise we just talked about. If you're perpetually dissatisfied, I think you have this sort of this ambition to ad infinitum, just going after it. Yeah. Because the tools change, the environment changes. Apple could have had great aspiration for mobile computing, but without the advent of the device or the advent of the developer ecosystem, it wouldn't have happened. So there are these inflection points, and if you're perpetually dissatisfied, you'll find how to best leverage the next inflection point. Yeah. And while the competition's focused on feeds and speeds.
Right. But like competition is sort of very interesting variable there, right? Because like I mean, an effect that I think every observer of industry can find examples of is like highly innovative markets that have a lot of competition, and after some consolidation later, innovation kind of dries up. So in my mind, this is because the motivation that caused all the innovation was not actually intrinsic desire to build great products, but rather extrinsically motivated competition. Like I want to win.
I want to win.
I don't know, like how do you think about this? It seems pretty clear to me that to build like a world-class company, you have to figure out like this sort of intrinsic motivation to do it. Like Shopify's like did not actually have a like at least sort of a head-to-head competition with another company in over a decade, which seems incredible given how valuable our market is. But like, what's your thought on that?
No, I'm a big believer in intrinsic motivation as a fuel for an organization.
But how do you cultivate it? How do you cultivate it? It seems like something. Is that something people are born with? Is this something companies have in the beginning and lose, or how does it?
I would say one is, you really have to be a purpose-focused organization. Why are we here has to resonate with people. They have to want to talk about it when they go home, when they meet their friends for a beer. Why are we here has to be real. So that's number one, I would say, in terms of intrinsic motivation. Number two, I would say be careful of measurement. We've created these organizations that work on carrot and stick. And in a quest to comfort ourselves that everyone's probably motivated, we create deeper and deeper measures, which actually get in the way. They get in the way of the focus and that motivation. Like someone once said that, if measures force you to look up like a cathedral, you'll stop looking out towards the customer, right? Because you're so focused on optimizing your piece of the silo or the tower or the measure. So I think that's an important consideration. I think the other one is just sort of the talent you choose. Some people are more naturally gravitate to solving big problems, to doing great things, to and choosing leaders that have that mindset will infect other leaders. And I think that's a big and part of the biggest part of the job in your role, Toby, or senior executive's role is talent management. Who are the people that embody the best version of Shopify, and how do we get them here, and then how do we help and support them be the very best version of themselves? Because role modeling is the most important cultural trait that exists in an organization. You know, like people are fascinated by their leaders and you know what they prioritize, what they spend time on, what they care about being in the details of, what they ascribe value to, and those are like those infect the culture. That's sort of the viral culture happens through that, you know, and having them manifest in things like summits is incredible, right? Because summit is really a manifestation of that value set and priority set. So I think that's like sort of job one of leadership, is to create that context. And then you have a fighting chance of maintaining that relevance and not becoming, you know, becoming stagnant as a market matures and you win, you know, because there's no destination. You and I have talked a bit about, you know, this finite, infinite game philosophy. Business is an infinite game. Like people that declare victory, that worries me. I think that's not the company I want to be part of or even think about if they declare. There's no victory. There's the next chapter. There's the next level. There's the next evolution, right? And part of the job of leadership is creating the environment, the talent, the capability to be ready for that next evolution. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, you know, knowing what, like which way to face, right? Like it's like customer being merchant obsessed is like just really important to us. Like it's the sort of our, you know, they are obviously our customers. They are also our. I don't know if I use the right term, and I haven't like really like sort of rendered this into the right word in my mind. But like, we want to pre-solve their problems. Like we want we want to make, like we think the activity is the act of starting companies is the thing that we would like to see a lot more of in the world, and through Shopify we can make this again more tractable for a larger and larger group of people by you know, just like making better software, better tools. It's like this is how progress happens. Like tools get better, and then we can build more ambitious things. And so,
and you put them out in front of customers before they even think they need them.
Yeah, that's right. Ideally,
they're delighted to see, wow, they can do that. I never thought of that. What a great idea. Let's do that.
In fact, what's most amazing thing is when they have a new idea and they're like, okay, I'm gonna just like, I know this is silly or maybe crazy. I'm gonna just try this, and then it works. And the software played a significant role of making it work, but it's irrelevant that is why it worked. They are feeling extremely good about their own capabilities. And that experience is the thing that makes them do this again and again and again, right? So like in a way you can have a huge impact on people's just like readiness and openness to try new things. And I think that's, you know, was a huge responsibilities because we adopt an obvious responsibility of, you know, running the website and having a fantastic and high converting checkout and these kind of things. But like there's an even larger responsibility to have this sort of positive influence on their own careers and ambition and so on, which we take very seriously. At least this works for us, and as I think a source that is burns bright enough to motivate us in even with no one building equivalent competing products.
Right.
But it's
well, the other thing you've done very well, I think, is as a company is when you get to an inflection point, you get to a place where, you know, you've mastered a part of the craft, you widen the aperture and you change the definition of success or what's next. And that's part of the always, you know, changing the breadth of what we're up to. You know, you started with this notion of building e-commerce sites, taking the friction away from that, and then just got bigger and bigger to solve the bigger problem. And now we're talking about not just merchants, but brands. We're talking about small businesses. We're talking about the globe. We're talking about, you know, capital. We're talking about payments. We're talking like the sort of this. just keep widening the aperture. There's no greater motivation for a team than to feel like, okay, now we got a bigger playing field.
What I think is really so certainly there's widening, but like I mean we are kind of blessed in a way that our space is so large, right? Like it's we can widen the aperture while still being focused on the space that we initially set out on. So, but in a very real way, most of what we've actually done successfully is actually going deeper, right? Like it's like going deeper in the stack, helping with more parts, like the financing, the banking,
You're right. Deeper is a better way of looking at it.
It's almost
holistically deeper.
Yeah, because we did go again in logistics. We mentioned this earlier already, and that might have been just like outside of a cone of how far we should go outside, right? Like I mean, Shopify has so far like certainly resisted doing the sort of the M&A driven, like let's do a million things kind of approach, which I mean some companies pursue, sort of a Berkshire Hathaway kind of model of building market value, and I think that
which is very hard.
It's I'm sure this is very hard. I don't know how to
largely because of the stats say that 3/4 of M&A fails to deliver the value intended or proposed. Number one reason, culture conflict.
I think it's probably that number makes sense in the context of entire industry. I bet you if you scope it down to tech industry, it's much lower than that yet. I like there's like 3 or 4 acquisitions which everyone points to, and maybe like 10 other more subtle ones that ended up working outside of like talent acquisitions. Like
right, that's different.
Meta buying Instagram is or YouTube buying YouTube being bought by Google are obvious. There's a recent one with NVIDIA buying InfiniBand, which probably gonna go down as probably potentially the best of all time. But these are really rare. But these acquisitions really work and are actually strategic and integrated because of exactly what you're saying. Integration is just like very hard.
And there's an opportunity cost to integration.
Yeah,
there's no greater way to distract the management team than to pour them into integration.
Yeah.
So it's a big bet in terms of mind share.
Again, logistics is the thing we keep getting back to. The like integrating Deliver as a company, and then like pursuing this space and building warehouses and robotics related to the warehouses, like would have been a something we could have done in a more static technology environment. But the moment AI came along, it was like very clear that the focus should be like in a horizontal again, because we can reinvent every part of the stack in retail, and that's much more clearly in our wheelhouse. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is how corporate strategy really ought to be done. It's like it's sort of, you know, tested against mission, like thinking about you know, skill sets and sort of main. I talked about it in terms of main quest and side quest, to use some somewhat video game related language, which felt fitting. And so anyway, it's yeah, very interesting. Well, thank you for joining. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for making a place at your table for me. I'm looking forward to helping and supporting the future. I feel in some ways that I'm in some, you know, alternate parallel universe. I'm coming around and meeting my younger self again in a different time or a different context. Yeah, you know, by being a part of this world at Shopify, and it's very exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.